My name is Ella, and I can't pinpoint the exact moment I realized I was different from my younger sister, Sarah. Perhaps it was at 7, when she, at 4, played with dolls while I assisted my mom in the kitchen. Or maybe it was during those endless afternoons spent peering through the kitchen window, watching other kids outside as I scrubbed dishes almost too high for me to reach. Ella, homework done? Mum would ask daily after school, her voice sharp with expectation. Yes, Mum, I'd reply, already tying on the 2 large aprons she'd given me for my 6th birthday, a practical gift. She'd called it, "Good, now, help me with dinner. Sarah, honey, you can go play." Sarah would skip off, her dark pigtails bouncing, while I'd stretch on my tiptoes to reach the counter. Even at 7, I knew better than to complain. "She's still little," Mum would say. Whenever I tried, "You're the big sister, you need to help out." Dad wasn't any different. He'd return from work, ruffle Sarah's hair as she showed him her latest drawing, usually completed during homework time. Then he'd turn to me with that familiar look. "How were your grades today, Ella?" Never, "How was your day?" or "What? Did you learn just grades?" "Always grades. All A's, Dad," I'd say, and he'd nod, as if that were the bare minimum, which it was. Our house was modest, a 2-story middle-class home. My friends lived nearby, but I rarely saw them outside of school. There was always something to do: dishes, laundry, assisting Sarah with her homework even though she rarely paid attention, or studying to uphold those flawless grades. I recall one particular afternoon when I was 10. I'd just secured first place in the regional math competition, and my parents glowed with pride as my teacher lauded me. "You've done an extraordinary job raising Ella, Mrs. Peterson," she complimented. "Her passion for learning is remarkable." Mum and Dad exchanged delighted glances. "Well, we've always encouraged her to read," Mum said, her hand resting on my shoulder, "haven't we, Ella?" I longed to tell Mrs. Peterson the truth, that I'd studied late by flashlight because my days were consumed by chores, that the only encouragement I received was the implicit threat of disappointment if I brought home anything less than perfect. But I simply smiled and nodded, embodying the dutiful daughter they expected. Meanwhile, Sarah was fashioning paper airplanes from her failed math test in the hallway, and no one uttered a word about it. That was the constant in our household. Sometimes I'd catch Sarah watching me with a smirk, especially when she'd escape consequences for something that would have earned me a lecture. "You're just jealous," she once told me when I was 12 and she was 9, "because Mum and Dad like me better." I remember standing in our shared bathroom, my hands still damp from cleaning it, gazing at her reflection in the mirror I'd just wiped streak-free. "That's not true," I said. Yet even then, a part of me wondered. By the time Sarah started middle school, I was essentially her private tutor, not by choice, but by parental decree. Every afternoon, I'd sit with her at the kitchen table, attempting to explain basic algebra while she texted covertly under the table. "Sarah, you need to pay attention," I'd plead, drained after my own school day and chores. "Why, you'll just end up doing it for me anyway," she'd retort with that irritating smirk. And she was right. That's precisely what would transpire. "Ella, why isn't Sarah's homework finished yet?" Mom would inevitably ask, hands on her hips. "She's not focusing." "Then make her focus. You're supposed to be helping her." So, I'd end up completing Sarah's homework while she watched YouTube videos, simply because it was easier than enduring Mum's disappointment. Meanwhile, Sarah's weekly allowance materialized like clockwork, $20 every Friday. I was fortunate to receive $5 a month, usually accompanied by a lecture about money not growing on trees. The breaking point arrived when I turned 16. I was weary of watching Sarah flaunt her new clothes and latest gadgets, while I wore hand-me-downs and couldn't even afford lunch at school. That's when I noticed the help wanted sign at Joe's Cafe, just 3 blocks from our home. Joe, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd served me countless hot chocolates over the years, hired me on the spot. The work was demanding: tables, cleaning, spills, handling difficult customers, but it was mine. For the first time, I was earning my own money. That initial paycheck felt like liberation in my hands. $850 for a month of part-time work. I should have known better than to leave it on my desk. Ella, Mum's voice echoed through the house that evening. "Come down here right now." They were both waiting in the kitchen, my paycheck splayed on the table between them. Dad looked stern, Mum disappointed, expressions I knew all too well. "Why didn't you tell us you were making this much?" Dad demanded. "I just got paid," I stammered. "Well, since you're living in our house and eating our food, you'll be giving us half of this," Mum declared. "It's only fair." The worst part wasn't even surrendering half my paycheck. It was what unfolded next. A week later, Sarah sauntered into our room wearing brand new Nike sneakers. "Look what Mum and Dad bought me with your money," she chirped, twirling around. "Guess all that slaving away is good for something after all." I locked myself in the bathroom and wept that night, but it was also the moment I made my resolve. I was getting out, and college was my passage to freedom. My parents would never finance it. They'd made that abundantly clear whenever they spoke of Sarah needing college funds someday. So, I immersed myself in my studies with renewed determination. I started staying late at school to utilize the library computers, researching scholarships and free tuition programs. Every spare moment was dedicated to preparing for the SATs, crafting essays, and maintaining my flawless GPA. Graduation day was precisely as I expected, another performance of The Perfect Family, starring my parents. I endured the ceremony, in my blue cap and gown, watching them beam from the audience as Principal Roberts called me up as valedictorian. "The Matthews have done an extraordinary job raising Ella," he announced to the crowd. "Her academic achievements are truly remarkable." Mum dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while Dad stood tall, his chest puffed out with pride. I could see them basking in the praise, as they always did, nodding and smiling as other parents congratulated them on their wonderful parenting. What none of them knew was that I'd already received acceptance letters from every college I'd applied to. I'd been meticulously checking the mailbox for weeks, intercepting the letters before anyone else could see them. Each congratulations felt like a key to a door I'd been trying to unlock my entire life. But the best one, the one I'd chosen, was from Riverside State University, a full scholarship, free dormitory housing, and a stipend. It was 4 hours away, in the next state over, far enough that I couldn't come home on weekends to help out. I hadn't told them yet. I was waiting for the opportune moment, which arrived sooner than I anticipated. At our graduation dinner, Mum had prepared my favorite pasta, or what she thought was my favorite. She'd never actually asked. We were all seated around the dining room table. "So, Ella," Mum said, serving herself another helping, "have you considered what you'll do now?" I opened my mouth to tell them about Riverside, but before I could utter a word, Mom continued with a bright smile. "I was talking to Joe at the cafe yesterday. He said he'd be happy to take you on full-time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could earn so much more and really help out with the family expenses." I took a deep breath. I got accepted to college. Full scholarship at Riverside State. I'm starting in the fall. The silence that ensued was deafening. Mum's fork clattered against her plate. Dad's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. "College," Mum's voice was sharp, "in another state. But what about your family? What about helping your sister?" "I've been helping my sister my entire life," I said quietly. "This is something I need to do for myself." Dad rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he exited the room, slamming the door behind him. "Now, look what you've done," Mum hissed. Sarah just sat there with a slight smirk, probably already calculating how to claim my room once I left. That last summer at home felt like living with ghosts. I'd go to work at the cafe, come home, hand over half my paycheck, and retreat to my room. Mum and Dad barely spoke to me, only cold, necessary exchanges about bills or dinner times. The money they took from my paychecks, they accepted without a word of thanks. When August arrived, I packed my bags alone. No tearful goodbyes. No family photos on the front porch. No Dad loading up the car as I'd seen with other students. Just me, my 2 suitcases, and a bus ticket to Riverside State. "I'm leaving now," I announced that morning, standing in the kitchen doorway. Mum continued washing dishes, her back to me. Dad rustled his newspaper. Sarah didn't even look up from her phone. "Okay," Mum said, as if I'd told her I was just going to the grocery store. The bus ride to college was, for hours, of pure relief. With each mile I felt lighter, freer. My dorm room was small but clean, and my roommate, Jenny, became the sister I'd always longed for, supportive, kind, genuinely interested in my life. I dove into my finance classes, relishing every minute of learning about investment strategies and market analysis. My professors lauded my work ethic, and for once, there was no one around to claim credit for it. The rare calls home always followed the same pattern. "Sarah's thinking about becoming a model," Mom would say, never inquiring about my well-being. "She's just waiting for the right opportunity," Dad would add, ignoring my attempts to share my own accomplishments. In my junior year, Sarah graduated high school. Mum called specifically to inform me, though not to invite me to the ceremony. "Sarah is taking some time to figure things out," Mum explained breezily. "Her grades weren't quite college material, but we told her not to worry about it. The right job will come along." I reflected on how they'd pressured me to work at 16, how they'd taken half my earnings, how they'd fought my college dreams. "What's she doing in the meantime?" I asked. "Oh, just exploring her options," Mum said airily. "We don't want her to rush into anything she's not passionate about." I graduated with honors, my name at the top of the dean's list. Jenny's family cheered for me at graduation since mine didn't attend. 2 weeks later, I was back in my hometown, starting as a junior financial analyst at Reynolds & Associates. My starting salary exceeded my parents' combined income. The first time I could afford my own apartment, I felt like I could finally breathe. But as soon as word spread about my job, the dinner invitations began. "You must be doing well for yourself," Dad would say, eyeing my professional attire. "We're so proud," Mum would add before launching into another anecdote about Sarah's latest job, interview or modeling prospect. Sarah would sit across from me at these dinners, still engrossed in her phone, still searching for the right opportunity. At 19, she hadn't worked a day in her life, but somehow, that was acceptable. I was the one they looked to with expectant eyes, dropping hints about bills and home repairs. "The property taxes have gone up so much," Mum would sigh. "It's hard to make ends meet these days," Dad would add. So, I started giving them money, $500 here, $1,000 there. But their hints persisted, their expectations swelling with each deposit I made. The more I gave, the more they seemed to expect, as if I were compensating for the transgression of leaving, of constructing my own life. The day I was promoted to senior financial analyst, I made the error of mentioning it to Mum during our weekly call. Within hours, she'd arranged a celebratory dinner at their house. "We're so proud of you, honey," Mum said, but her voice held that distinct tone I knew too well. "It's wonderful that you're doing so well, especially since things have been so difficult here." Right on cue, Dad sighed heavily. "The company's making cuts again. They've reduced my hours. And these bills," Mum added, producing a crumpled paper from her pocket. Her eyes were already brimming with tears. "I just don't know how we're going to manage the utilities this month." I glanced at Sarah, still absorbed in her phone, wearing designer jeans that I knew Mum and Dad couldn't afford. I wanted to point out that a 22-year-old capable of spending hours making dance videos could probably handle a job application or two. The words were on my tongue, but I swallowed them. Then Mum dropped the bombshell. "You know, Ella," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand, "we've been thinking, you're spending so much on that apartment of yours. Why don't you move back home? You could save money, and we could help each other out." I felt like I was 16 again, watching my hard-earned money vanish into their pockets. The thought of surrendering my peaceful apartment, my independence, my personal space, it made my stomach churn. But as I opened my mouth to refuse, I saw the familiar guilt-inducing expressions on their faces. "Okay," I heard myself say, and watched their faces illuminate with joy. A week later, I was back in my childhood bedroom. The room felt smaller than I remembered, or perhaps I'd simply outgrown it. I laid down my conditions promptly. "I'll help with the bills and groceries, but I won't be cooking or cleaning. I did enough of that growing up." Mum agreed immediately, almost too quickly. It wasn't until I heard Sarah's outraged shriek the next day that I understood why. "What do you mean I have to clean?" she wailed. "I don't even know how to use the vacuum cleaner." "Well, it's time you learned," Mum said in a tone far gentler than she'd ever used with me about chores. "Ella's helping us financially, so you can help with the house." I watched from my doorway as Sarah stomped around with the vacuum, barely touching the carpet, muttering under her breath about the injustice of it all. She'd post passive-aggressive stories on Instagram later about forced labor and unfair treatment, but I couldn't bring myself to care. After all, she was still living off my money, my grocery payments, my utility contributions, my rent equivalent that mysteriously never seemed to alleviate our parents' financial strain. The least she could do was learn to clean a bathroom. "Ella, have you noticed how shabby the house is looking?" Mum casually remarked one morning over coffee. "The paint is peeling, and that wallpaper in the living room, ... Dad joined in immediately. "The bathroom fixtures are pretty outdated too. Sure would be nice to give this place a facelift." I knew what was coming. 3 days and several hints later, they finally asked outright if I would assist with some home improvements. By assist, of course, they meant pay for everything. I ended up spending nearly $30,000 on repairs and renovations, new paint throughout the house, updated bathroom fixtures, modern kitchen appliances, hardwood flooring to replace the old carpet, and fresh wallpaper in every room. I even had the exterior painted and the garden landscaped. The transformation was remarkable, I had to admit. The house looked like something out of a home improvement magazine. And suddenly, our house became the social hub of the family. "You must come see what we've done with the place," Mum would say. On the phone to relatives and friends, "We've made such wonderful improvements. I'd sit quietly during these gatherings, watching Mum and Dad beam with pride as guests praised their beautiful home and excellent taste. Not once did they mention that I'd funded the entire renovation. Not once did they acknowledge that their improved lifestyle came from my bank account. As Christmas approached, they planned their biggest gathering yet. Mum invited every relative within driving distance, plus all their friends. It'll be perfect," she kept saying. "Everyone will see how well we're doing." I spent a fortune on gifts for everyone, including a new laptop for Sarah that she'd been hinting about for months. Christmas Day arrived, and the house was overflowing with people admiring the renovations and enjoying the catered food, which I'd also paid for. When it came time to exchange gifts, I watched as Sarah unwrapped a brand new iPhone from our parents, complete with all the accessories. Her squeal of delight could probably be heard next door. My gift from them, a bath set from the drugstore, the kind you buy last minute when you've forgotten someone. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and thanked them, then watched as everyone opened the expensive gifts I'd bought them. Nobody seemed to notice the disparity. Nobody seemed to care. The party was winding down when Mum cleared her throat to make an announcement. "Linda and her kids are staying with us for a few days," she said, gesturing to her friend from out of state. Linda smiled warmly, her 2 teenage children looking tired after the long drive. "That's nice," I said, already contemplating how cramped the living room would be with 3 people sleeping there. But Mum wasn't finished. "Ella, you'll need to clear your things out of your room. Linda and the kids will be staying there." I stood there in the middle of the living room, still processing what I'd just heard. Linda and her kids shifted, uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. "They can stay in the living room," I suggested, trying to keep my voice level. "We can set up the pull-out couch and bring in the air mattress." "Don't be ridiculous," Mum snapped. "They're guests. We can't make them sleep in the living room. They'll be uncomfortable there." The irony of her concern for their comfort struck me like a physical blow. "And what about my comfort?" I asked, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "Did you think about that at all?" Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Stop making a scene. Just pack your things and move to the living room. It's only for a few days." I looked around at the house I'd renovated, at the Christmas decorations I'd paid for, at the presents I'd bought. Something inside me snapped. Why can't they stay in Sarah's room? The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's head snapped up from her new iPhone, her mouth agape. Mom and Dad looked at each other as if I'd suggested setting the house on fire. "I can't believe you'd even suggest that," Sarah sputtered. "That's completely out of the question," Mum said firmly. "Why?" I pressed. "Why is it okay to displace me but not her?" Mum's face turned red. "You're embarrassing me in front of my friend," she hissed. "This is not how we raised you to behave. If you can't show proper respect in this house," Dad thundered, "then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. Get out," Mum added, her voice shrill. "Get out until you learn some manners." I looked at them, truly looked at them, at Mum's self-righteous anger, at Dad's crimson face, at Sarah's smug little smile. Not one of them seemed to remember, or care, that I was the one who'd paid for the roof over their heads, the food on their table, the presents under their tree. I didn't remind them. Instead, I walked upstairs to my room, the room they wanted to give away like it was theirs to give. My hands were steady as I packed my suitcase, as I made calls to find a hotel or hostel that had vacancies on Christmas night. The Paradise Inn, a small hostel on the edge of town, had 1 room left. I booked it immediately. 20 minutes later, I walked down those beautiful hardwood stairs I'd paid for, carrying my suitcase. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said a word. Sarah just smirked and went back to playing with her new iPhone. The Paradise Inn wasn't much, a small room with a lumpy bed and a shared bathroom down the hall, but it felt more like home than my parents' house had in years. I spent New Year's Eve there, with Chinese takeout and my laptop, searching for apartments. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in a modern complex across town, far from my parents' neighborhood. My phone buzzed constantly those first few days. Texts and calls from my parents and Sarah. I didn't read or answer any of them. I bought furniture I actually liked, not just what my parents would approve of. Painted the walls colors I chose, and created a space that was entirely mine. 2 weeks after I moved in, Mum finally caught me off guard. I answered my phone without checking the caller. I dare mistake I wouldn't make again. "The utility bills are due," she said without preamble, her voice sharp and demanding. "Linda and her kids are gone now, so you can come back. Your room is waiting." I almost laughed at the absurdity. No hello, no apology, just another demand. No, I said quietly. What do you mean, no? She sounded genuinely confused, as if the possibility of my refusal had never occurred to her. I mean, no, Mum, I'm not coming back, and I'm not paying your bills anymore. There was a moment of stunned silence, then the explosion I'd been expecting. How dare you? She shrieked. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. By abandoning your family when we need you to. I let her rant for a moment, listening to the familiar guilt trips and accusations. They didn't touch me anymore. You made it very clear how you really feel about me, I said when she paused for breath. You've shown me that I'm nothing more than a checkbook to you. Well, that checkbook is closed now. Don't call me again unless you're ready to treat me with respect. I hung up before she could respond. The calls and texts intensified after that. Dad left voicemails about family duty. Sarah sent manipulative messages about how she was suffering because of my selfishness. Mum alternated between rage and tearful guilt trips. I blocked them all. Weeks passed, then months. I threw myself into my work, secured another promotion, and started taking yoga classes. Through mutual friends, I heard about what was happening at my parents' house. They were struggling to pay bills for the first time in years. Sarah had been forced to take a job as a cashier at the local supermarket, the kind of unglamorous work she'd always looked down on. She was apparently terrible at it, constantly calling in sick and complaining about having to stand all day. Mum and Dad were telling anyone who would listen about their ungrateful eldest daughter, who had abandoned them in their time of need. They'd spin elaborate tales about all they'd sacrificed for my education, none, and how they'd supported my career they hadn't, and how I'd betrayed them as soon as I found success. Some people believed them, let them. The truth was, I'd spent 25 years being the person they wanted me to be, the obedient daughter, the responsible one, the family ATM. Now, it was time to be myself. The funny thing is, I'm actually grateful to them now, not for the years of manipulation and control, but for that last Christmas night when they pushed too far. Sometimes, you need to lose everything to find yourself.